So, guys, I want to review the episode Cartman Sucks, and definitely this is one of the funniest episodes of South Park. And definitely, what you just saw was kind of like my reaction at the end of the episode with what happens to Cartman. Definitely, this is also a very, very controversial episode because now you see that Cartman is not only somebody who's inspired genocide and a racist and an anti-Semite. You also see him as somebody who commits sexual assault. And there are a lot of themes within this episode, and definitely I want to go through it. That in the first part of the episode, you see a book, a photo album of pictures Cartman takes. So definitely, unfortunately for Cartman, this is wasted energy. Like you see him smear animal shit on Butter's nose, to do like a mustache type of thing. You see him put a tampon in his and Butter's mouth, and you see him moon Butters. And this is also what we call a Cartman comeuppance episode. Cartman does bad shit to Butters, and then eventually something bad happens to him. So what happens is Stan, Kyle, and Kenny kind of see these pictures, and then what happens is that Butters comes along, and Kyle gets a guilty conscience, and then he's kind of like saying, then Butters manipulates, Cartman manipulates Butters into saying that, okay, well, you're my new best friend. Kyle's just jealous. Yeah, grow up, Kyle. So you're kind of seeing the first problem where, honestly, it's really disgusting what Cartman does to Butters because obviously being exposed to that different types of bacteria with tampons, you don't know if it's used or not. And then also just mooning him and then just putting cat shit on him. He's exposing him to a lot of different types of bacteria. So obviously there's that thing. And then there's also that thing, too, of Kyle, Stan, and Kenny not being good friends and standing up for Butters, or even telling his parents or Kyle or Cartman's mother about what's going on, because obviously that's putting Butters in a situation where he's being hazed and taken advantage of. And also, it kind of goes down with what we say that honestly we need to protect our kids. Sometimes when kids have slumber parties, we should just definitely tell them, what did you eat? Did you take any medication? Did you, have NyQuil or anything like that? When did you guys go to bed? Like, just questions to kind of like, just know what's going on, and then be like, okay, well, this doesn't sound right. I need to look into this. And that also is kind of like true with Butters because obviously, they go to bed at 6:30. And Cartman gives him a bunch of NyQuil. It says, if you want to take some NyQuil, this is what we'll do and stuff like that. So I do kind of think that that's also the issue with Butters, that he's very, very naive, but because we are because we're the audience, we kind of know what's happening to Butters. He's being sort of roofied. He's being roofied with NyQuil. He's being NyQuiled, which is really fucked up. And then the next thing they kind of reveal that actually the picture was of Cartman performing oral sex on Butters. And he didn't realize, because he's a kid, he didn't realize that it's actually the other way around. That when you perform oral sex on somebody, that's you committing a homosexual act, also sexual assault. But either way, it's still sexual assault. Even if it was Cartman putting his penis in Butters' mouth, it's still sexual assault. It doesn't make Butters gay. And I don't even think, and I also think that, even with this whole entire thing, what Kyle says and Kenny says about that making Cartman gay, that's not really true because, sometimes we kind of attach labels to things. I do think that, honestly, if you identify as gay, you're gay, but you can't just say, okay, well, I just had sex one time or I did something that's a homosexual act that automatically be a homosexual. I don't think that that's appropriate. So it does kind of show an old school attitude. And then also kind of shows, that they're kids and they also have some stereotypes around gay people because what happens, and also it's kind of concerning because, Stan, Kyle, and Kenny don't report this to the police or tell Butters' parents or make a big deal about it. So it shows, just how little they care about Butters, or they may be like, okay, well, Butters needs to figure this out for himself. Some people do that, but obviously when there's naive people, that you should protect your friends. But I would kind of say that, definitely when definitely like how they kind of consider Cartman gay is very concerning to their own type of what defines a gay person in their eyes as well, not just Cartman's eyes. And then also saying something to Cartman like the way to change it is for Butters to give Cartman oral sex. And I think Cartman says that he's going to manipulate Butters into doing that. So I think that there's another issue too that, and this does happen among kids sometimes, that honestly, Kyle, Stan, and Kenny don't either don't realize or don't accept that Butters is being sexually assaulted multiple times, really. So they may not know it's sexual assault, or they may not care that it's sexual assault. And that's why it's always good when kids are young to talk about these things, or if there's any type of hazing where somebody does something to your private parts, it is sexual assault, you need to tell an adult. So it kind of like, that's also kind of a theme, just a lack of protecting our kids, but a lack of education on what sexual assault and other things are. The next thing that I would kind of say is that Butters goes to a camp. No, Butters, in Butters' house, what happens is Cartman tries to manipulate him into performing oral sex on him. So Butters wears a big blindfold. Cartman just lifts up his shirt. Butters about to put it in his mouth, and Cartman says, close your eyes, I'll give you a big surprise. So the other sad thing about this episode is that Butters' dad walks in, but Butters' dad is more concerned about Butters potentially being homosexual, instead of the fact that if he looks into it, he would realize that his son has been almost sexually assaulted, or attempted sexual assault, which is still considered sexual assault. And he's not doing anything about it. So I do think this kind of goes down to maybe, like how sometimes parents look at things one way, or when they're upset, they'll look at things one way instead of like how things actually are. Like there are, and this is kind of an old stereotype, but there are, there's these things where, like there's, back in the 50s, and my godmother told me this, my aunt told me this, that sometimes a woman was raped, even if it was a teenager, sometimes people would blame the woman for putting herself in a bad situation, like going in a car with a stranger, if they ask her for a ride home. Or sometimes what also happens is they may say, okay, you were wearing a skirt, or oh well, you know what, you put this you turn this guy on because you look kind of sexy or whatever. There was always like rape myths. And I also think this kind of alludes to some of the rape myths, like where the concern is about for Butter's dad. I think the big concern is that Butters may be homosexual, not that I'm gonna look into this and see that Butters was sexually assaulted and Cartman needs to, he needs psychiatric help and other things like that, and a restraining order to not be in that situation with Butters again. So because of a misunderstanding, Butters goes to a Pray Away the Gay camp, and there's a bunch of kids who commit suicide. And also the other thing that happened, Butters commits, there's a bunch of kids who commit suicide, and then also Butters doesn't know what confused and bi-curious is. So there's also that thing about things being lost in translation. We don't explain things. We don't communicate with things. And I think if Butters communicated the whole situation, he would realize, and his dad would realize, that he's being sexually assaulted by Cartman. He's not gay. He's just a victim of sexual assault. The other thing about it is that, how we use terms that kids don't get. Confused means two things in the world, in this episode of South Park. It means actually confused, and it actually means confused about my sexuality, confused that I may be gay. And bi-curious means that I did a homosexual act, and people may think that I'm down the path of becoming homosexual, which many people consider immoral in the Bible and sexually inappropriate in the Bible. So I do think that it's unfortunate that Butters and his father don't realize, what Cartman was doing and just how serious it was. But then Butters goes to this camp, and a lot of kids commit suicide here. And I know it's done for dark comedy, but I think the point of it is that they're saying that you can pray away the gay, you can mold people into what you want, and it just never ever works. It's actually kind of traumatizing, but it's also when you hear every single day that you're going to burn in hell, or you're undesirable, or you're horrible for identifying as gay, or being comfortable with your sexuality or promiscuity. There's people who are openly very sexual creatures. There's people who are openly gay. There's people who are to be LGBTQ. There's people who ultimately want to change their gender to trans, or other things, but if you hear all the time that you're gay and an abomination, it can inspire people to be suicidal, and this definitely plays out and through the episode. And then also with the camp counselor that's very effeminate and acting gay, and all that stuff. I think what they're trying to say is that the pray away the gay and all this stuff, it just doesn't work. And the end message with Butters is that he says that maybe, if you look at religion and everybody's created and everybody's a creation from God, more than likely God may be every sexuality or every sexual orientation as well. And then the other thing he says that, maybe you guys are all confused, because sometimes that happens too, where some people may have gone through that type of generational trauma. Oh, well, they're actually gay, or they're actually sexually experimental, or they're other sexual orientation, or they're an other type of sexual identity, and then they go to these programs, they get converted to being straight and God-fearing Christians, and it's through abuse and emotional abuse, and then they kind of pass that down. So, like, there's generational trauma there. And then the other thing is that they kind of do a little joke with Butter's dad, Steven, I believe is his name, and then what happens is that they make a joke that he's actually bi-curious, and Butters doesn't catch on, but we catch on because we remember that episode of South Park, Butters' very own episode, where he goes to the White Swallow bathhouse and wrestles with a bunch of black men and other people like that. So again, it's also kind of like the other thing too of no open communication or assuming kids know when they don't know. And then the last part of it is what happens with Cartman. Like, again, this is Cartman come up in this episode. He has a picture of him performing oral sex on Butters, and then he shows it to the class at the end. And then there's a couple of things that I want to say about it. That, first of all, definitely a lot of people like the Cartman come up in episodes, because I think like a long time, I think there was an episode of South Park, Jared has AIDS, and a lot of people did not like that episode because they didn't like how Butters got beaten by his parents and there was no consequence for Cartman. So I think a lot of people wrote Trey Parker, Matt Stone saying that we kind of just don't like that. And I also think the other thing too is that, it honestly makes Butters like Meg Griffin. So it is kind of good to kind of just be like, okay, well, he's a punching bag, but we don't want a copycat Family Guy. And I think they also learned from Pip that, okay, now you just create a very likable punching bag character. So sometimes they realize that Butters can be a punching bag, but they also have to make him win sometimes. And sometimes the best way to make him win is to make Cartman lose. And that's what happens in this episode. So that's one of the things. The other thing is that it's also kind of about how very manipulative Cartman is. Like, he's trying to manipulate the police. He's trying to manipulate his mother. And just saying it was an accidental picture, or that he's not gay, or he did not commit sexual assault. And I don't think he realizes what he did was sexual assault. I just think that he saw it as kind of more as hazing and crossing a line, really. But what ends up happening is that he tells his mother, he tries to manipulate her into saying it was an accidental act instead of what it was. So it kind of shows how naive and kind of stupid she is, and then also kind of how bad of a parent she is, because she tells like Kyle's mom about the image. And I can imagine Sheila just yelling at Kyle and be like, what and all that, but if I was Sheila, I would kind of tell Kyle, okay, I'm gonna check your room, we're gonna look at it, doesn't have it. And then the other thing is, I would say, okay, well, you're not talking to Cartman because clearly that family has issues. That's what I would do. And I think that's also another thing, is that kind of like how nobody holds Cartman accountable and nobody holds Leanne accountable. Like, Cartman just gets public humiliation. So Cartman shows the image. He's also doing like that thing that some artists do where he's justifying the picture. And, there are plenty of artists in history who do things like that, where they may make a very inappropriate or pornographic picture, or a picture that they should not display because it's very sexual in nature, and then they'll say, okay, it's for this reason, that reason. Like, for example, there's this piece of artwork called the Piss Christ, where somebody put a statue of Jesus Christ in a vat of urine, and it was kind of like showing how glowing it looks, even if it's with a golden shower. There was also this woman called Wendigo, and what she did was she actually collected like bloody maxi pads from around the world to show that, like, all women are the same in the fact that we all bleed together. I remember in college that there was this guy who had a girl bend over doggy style, and he did like a painting of that, and he was kind of like saying like how it's a representation of our country going into Nazism, when it kind of was very clear that this guy, was this guy clearly had a bunch of issues. But there are plenty of artists that do that. There are some artists, like, people talk about Pablo Picasso, that he just kind of slept and fucked his models before after he did paintings. So there's always stories about artists that will say things are done for artistic merit, but when you look at the person, they may be a sexual predator, or they may just be profane for the sake of being profane. And sometimes they may say like their art style or their lifestyle is of an artist. I'm going to call it an artist, when actually they're being a sexual predator or abusing people. That's not every artist, but that's definitely very common, especially during the 19th century, during the 1900s and 1800s. Like there's plenty of paintings. I think there's one done by Henry Matisse or something like that, of him going to the Philippines or other countries, where he would be painting women naked, and some of the women were like underage, and these are paintings that are hanging in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the MoMA, and other places. And people don't look at it as, oh, well, he's painting a naked teenager. They look at it as, okay, he's showing like how beautiful and exotic this country is, and just that people walking around naked is normal. There are plenty. I think Edvard Munch, who did The Scream, same thing. There are some paintings that he did of naked 14-year-olds. So there are plenty of artists that will, especially in history, they will justify their style. And that be that. I think another great example, I think a more concurrent example, is you look at Brooke Shields and how she posed in Playboy when she was a teenager. Why was Hugh Hefner doing that? Also in Blue Lagoon, she was a teenager being naked in that film. There's also Pretty Baby, where I think she was like 8 or 9 years old, and she was performing naked in that film. And she was playing like a hooker, even though it was trying to show how bad the antebellum South was. It was still kind of like an artist, a cinematographer, a director, Hugh Hefner, all just trying to have a pedophilia agenda, but say, I'm going to justify it as something else. I'm going to justify it as art. And Cartman's doing the exact same thing by justifying his bullying and harassment and hazing of Butters, even though he may not realize it's sexual assault, as art to kind of cover his ass, when, what happens is people realize what it really is, so Cartman sucks. And then the other thing that I will say as the final thing is that I was talking to some people when I watched this episode. Like, there's Dash Reacts, who reviews South Park episodes, and he does a hell of a good job. But I was kind of like debating on what happened after that, and I kind of was saying that more than likely Leanne Cartman found a way to get Cartman out of trouble. And I think like what some people said, that more than likely she probably had sex with Mr. Mackey and a few other people, maybe even Principal Victoria and other people, to kind of get himself out of that trouble, really. Or maybe what happened was Butters' dad grounded Butters, because he kind of blamed Butters after that. Or maybe Cartman got sent to pray with the gay camp, because maybe that was like a way for him to avoid consequences, instead of just, going to jail for sexual assault and then going to a psych ward. Because usually when you're this young, they may put you in a psych ward and just see what, help you need to just make sure that you don't do this to people, and then also expulsion and other things. So I do think that, this is a very interesting episode. It's definitely a powerful episode in a few lights. An episode about pray away the gay camps, also how sexual acts happen to children and they don't have a lot of education on what are sexual acts, and then also how parents miscommunicate with kids. So sometimes things happen and not the right people are punished. Butters ultimately gets punished by going to a pray away the gay camp and not being looked at as a sexual assault victim. And then also, we see Butters in the future, and he's actually psychologically traumatized by Cartman. So obviously, maybe these are one of the things that add to his multi-layered trauma and then other things like that. So it's unfortunate. And then also too, just how manipulative Cartman is, and how there's a lack of consequences sometimes for people who commit sexual assault. And then also the other thing that I will say is that how there are artists who justify sexual acts, profane sexual acts, transgressive sexual acts, sexual assault, showing their sex life in a way that's inappropriate and uncomfortable as regular art. And sometimes there may be a backstory of pedophilia or sexual predatory or sexual harassment type of behavior. So, definitely very cerebral episode. I'm happy to talk about all the points. Even though it's made for comedy as a Cartman come up since episode, there's definitely a lot of things to meditate on in Cartman Sucks.